Hello, HA. Good day. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Lewis. How are you?
Good, good, good. So, thank you for taking the time today to talk to me about your thoughts around 2025, um, the state of the state, if you will, that seems to keep changing, and sort of the new complexions, I think, that come with the idea of brand safety. So, for a number of years, we've been on a certain path. Um, I think it's fair to say, with the eventual change of the administration, the tone for brand safety has changed for many. And so I just wanted to explore with you your thoughts on 2025 and sort of what to expect in the new environment. Sound good to you?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So let's start with, of course, the one thing that everyone is talking about, AI. AI. And certainly from my perspective, AI has been a great boon to the industry in terms of actual intelligence from a consumer perspective, and then in particular from a brand safety perspective. And we'll come at both of those things separately. But if you think about large language models and their ability to ingest huge amounts of information and actually have make some contextual intelligence out of it all, that's a big thing. The other side of that is that takes a heck of a lot of computing power. And the other side of that is that makes it really, really expensive to continuously do at scale. So as we sit and everybody sort of wonders, what do I do about AI? How does AI fit into my strategy? And sort of this could be a little bit out of your specific wheelhouse, but just your first general impressions on sort of AI, its utility, its competence in its current state, and its ability to do things from a marketing standpoint, i.e., personalization, more relevant contextual sort of understanding of messaging going back and forth between companies and consumers. So, any broad thoughts about AI and its utility moving forward?
Yeah. So I think I'll sort of take this from two different angles. One, just my personal perspective as a consumer and user of the internet, and the other, just perspectives on marketing with the acknowledgement that we'll get to brand safety in a second. But I think as a consumer, AI has proven kind of similar to what you hinted at, very helpful in terms of helping me kind of get started on certain tasks. I'm also in school part-time getting my MBA, and a few of the courses that I've taken there, we've actually been asked to use AI as components of our work, which I think is a good thing for schools to be doing now. But also then sort of providing transparency on the role that AI played in whatever it is you generate, academic integrity, all that good stuff. But I found that AI is very helpful at kind of initial ideation. Like it isn't necessarily great at coming up with net new ideas, but it's great at kind of knocking out the tedium of, I have a couple bulleted thoughts on a topic. I have word vomit form of an essay, and I need these words put into something that is legible, grammatically correct, and roughly flows a certain way. And I found that AI has been really great at that sort of synthesizing, kinds of tasks. With that being
Can
said,
I can I can can I interrupt you for 1 second?
go
So
for it.
when you say that you're using it for your MBA class and you think that that's good, is your sense that in academia they're trying to understand the ethical boundaries of
Oh,
AI? Is there some experimentation going on there?
definitely. Experimentation is a great way to put it. It is not a one size fits all approach on this is how, this school in particular has decided the use of AI is appropriate or not. It's very much professor by professor, depending on who is skeptical of it,
Mm.
believe that this is the future and that it's an important component of education to train people how to succeed in an AI forward workforce in the future. So I've had professors say, categorically the use of AI is prohibited, that counts as cheating, you'll be expelled, blah, blah, blah. And, not blah, blah, blah. But I've had others that say the use of AI is required. As part of your final group project presentation, whatever, you have to use AI. You have to
Mhm.
then dedicate a portion of whatever your final deliverable is to explaining how AI was used, what it did well, what it didn't do well, to help people learn how to better use it. I personally prefer that latter approach. Just acknowledging that at some point the line will be so blurred that it is interwoven into everything we do. But I think especially at some yeah, older educational institutions, there's a bit of catching up work that needs to be done to acknowledge the current realities that we're currently living in. Um, and I find that I think like I mentioned, AI is very good at those sort of synthesis tasks where like I have thoughts that I want you to put into something that I can work with.
Mhm.
I am not in a position right now as a consumer to trust AI to produce a final product of anything. It's, the human touch is very much still needed in that. And I think kind of shifting that into my perspective on how AI is being leveraged by brands, it's in a similar sort of state. I think AI has, great potential for developing things like chatbots and other sort of means of helping brands interact with their consumers. With that being said, I also think there is a large something to be said about having a human in the loop, where I find if I find any hint of automation right now being used, whether it's a chatbot, whether it's on a phone line or whatnot, my immediate thought is just to shout agent or human until I get to an agent or a human. I don't care.
Which could be a very long time.
Yes, sometimes it is. But I like, just my gut instinct as a consumer is I don't care what sort of decision trees you are trying to put me down. I don't care if the chatbot you've trained is, so good that it could outperform a human at this task. I want to speak to a human representative of your company. And I like to think that I'm not alone in that, where either it's because AI has yet to gain broad-based consumer trust on its effectiveness, its ability to, you know, authoritatively speak, so to speak, on behalf of the brand and act on behalf of the brand, that
Mhm.
I need access to a human. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's going to be a difficult sort of paradigm to shift, even as these solutions get, exponentially better over time. The last thing I'll say on AI is I think that it's, or outside of brand safety at least, is I think there's a lot of potential for marketers to leverage it in targeting, broadly speaking. I think AI introduces an interesting new means by which marketers can navigate some of the constraints that have been imposed on reaching their target audiences in recent years through regulation and privacy protections and the like. I think AI can be used to find, hyper customized, hyper targeted audiences that brands may have missed in the past or not have been able to reach in the past. So, and hopefully without using the kinds of, creepy data use practices that we have seen in recent years. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. I also think AI will find new creepy ways to use data that we will have to legislate against. But I think broadly speaking, it's a tool for good to maximize effectiveness of campaigns within sort of legal bounds that have been imposed in recent years. Now, last thing, that being said, it sort of getting back to this notion of like a trust but verify with AI. I also think that we shouldn't take its ability to comply with all laws in terms of its output as a given. So
Mhm.
it's still not a set it and forget it. It's, you still have to have a human in the loop to make sure that whatever you're using AI in the way of targeting for, that it is still complying with those laws and that it's not behaving in such a way that you think, you wouldn't want to have to defend to regulatory bodies in the future.
Right. So,
That was a lot of word vomit on a lot of topics. Maybe lots
but
to
I
work
mean,
with.
I think it's true. I mean, I think if you're going to rely on your AI needs to be in shape, right? And so it needs constant exercise and coaching, right, to give you the output that you actually want. So let's then switch to the specific topic of brand safety. And we've witnessed mostly last year sort of the rise of all of these companies, smaller companies, with a promise that large language models can actually create the contextual appropriateness of content. But we've also seen, I think, the market retrench financially on some of those players. Meaning, so flipping back to the idea that to do it really well, it's really expensive. And to do it really well, you probably have to be somewhat specific, right? To sort of, right, manage the amount or the width of information that you're dealing with at any one time. What are your thoughts about sort of where we are at this moment in time? So we've had a bunch of startups. Some of them have retrenched. Some of them are sort of remodeling themselves a little bit. Can we count on AI being a big control factor or monitor for brand safety content?
So I think we've sort of framed it in this way in past conversations that we've had, but I view AI as a tool in a toolkit that consists of other technologies as well that, when collectively used, can effectively ensure brand safety and suitability or mitigate risk. To your point, it's very expensive to run a full fire hose of all content on a platform, all the environments in which your ad could show up through one of these models. So it's got to be, at least until it gets cheaper, which I'm sure it will over time, but I imagine it'll to some extent always be more costly than, say, a keyword list. It sort of has to be that last step in the funnel, maybe the last step before a human gets involved in the loop, where before that you pass, your inventory through a series of classifiers, lower energy consuming machine learning models, to some extent for the worst of the worst keyword lists. I know we hate to talk about that, and I know we want to move away from it, but I do think they will always have some role to play, even if I would like to see that role, shrink over time. And sort of get to this stage, and I come from a content moderation background. This is how I think about these sort of decision trees: is you pass all the content coming out of the fire hose through that first set of classifiers, sort of the blunter tools where you can exclude things that you feel comfortable making blunt decisions about, and then you get to the more intelligent models, and then you get to it gets add in a step for LLMs, and then only at that last step, once only if every other step in that process so far is unsure of how to treat a certain piece of content, then you have that last remaining pool of content be vetted by a human. So I imagine it will always sort of sit in a continuum of increasingly intelligent but also increasingly expensive means of detection and policy enforcement. So I'm hopeful that it will get cheaper and more effective and whatnot over time. But I think, as you pointed out, it is best utilized, at least in its current form, as if you have a specific set of either types of content or pools of content that you think require that elevated level of intelligence to assess, and where an understanding of context is really important to understanding what you do and don't block. I think that's where AI stands to play a big role. So in particular, like sorting through which news articles are and are not appropriate for your brand or something to that effect, as opposed to, if you don't want to show up next to the word Nazi, that pretty much regardless of context, you can, I feel like that's a defensible stance. And you can, put that in the keyword list and filter out whatever content that, is it capable of taking care of and not subjected to that expensive model. I also think that it's, how best to say this? I feel like AI has been equal parts legitimate innovation and branding. And I feel like AI as a moniker has been slapped on a lot of technologies that have existed for a long time without the meaningful underlying innovation to sort of meet the current consumer expectations or marketer expectations of what AI solutions can deliver. So we talk a lot as an industry about how AI has existed for a long time, like means of automating machine learning, like spell check is AI to some extent, and that has existed since Microsoft Word had that little paperclip guy in it. And I feel like that is a fair understanding of the fact that the notion of machine automation is not new. But I also feel like in this day and age, if you advertise a given solution as AI, people assume you mean generative AI and that's it. But I think there has been as like you mentioned, as much as there has been a wave of new entrants into this space that are introducing legitimately new technology that kind of meets that bar, there has been an equal sort of rebranding of existing automated solutions as AI
Repositioning, yes.
and
Yeah.
a sort of reliance on the fact that so few, if any of us, know how those kinds of models actually work, that no one is going to dig into that moniker if you slap it on your solution.
Right.
So I feel like there's a balancing act there. I am excited about the potential for AI as a tool in a brand safety toolkit where we are talking about legitimate recent AI innovations, but I'm also cautious to sort of bear in mind that it's equal part innovation and branding as we've sort of seen it play out.
Right on. Right on. So then that takes us to this idea that when done well, contextually, it can keep us presumably out of hot water, done right. But now, I think, and I made a reference earlier to a new mood in Washington, where views from both sides need to be accounted for. And I think you recently did a webinar that sort of went down this little path here. So if AI is supposed to help us be contextually better at making decisions about go, no go versus content, how do we then effectively use AI to our advantage in an atmosphere where truth and fact is not necessarily the order of the day, but a balance of voices seems to be the current call for what might be considered fair play. How do we manage that new dance, and sort of any thoughts that you sort of have or advice to marketers or buyers of inventory of how to navigate that quicksand?
Definitely. So I think and I've talked about this in a couple different ways over the last few months, but I think the broader shifts that we're seeing in terms of implications for marketers, I think we're seeing a shifting onus kind of further down, as it were, away from kind of broad-based industry frameworks, industry norms that we have sort of developed over the maybe last half decade plus, and even further down from individual ad agencies and really to individual brands needing to develop, maintain, and defend their stances on what they do and don't want to be associated with. Over the last couple of months, I've heard talk in many different forums about brand safety is dead. We don't care about that anymore. Like, oh, why do you still care about that? That's yesterday's problem. And I could not disagree more. I think the risks of associating with content or environments that don't resonate with your consumer base are as poignant as ever and stand to make just as much negative impact on your brand as they always have. And we see that this transcends sides of the political aisle, harkening back to what happened with Bud Light and their creator partnership. That really pissed off the political right, and that can happen just as much with that side of the aisle as, you know, pissing off more liberal consumers. So it's very much a broader problem that brands need to reckon with. Of, you know, it's still an issue for you if you show up in a way that, you know, your consumers take issue with. Now, that being said, I think we are seeing a sort of pendulum swing in sort of reactions to how people have approached brand safety topics in the past, where particularly brand suitability, where in the past it has been more, I guess, more generally accepted to make kind of broad-based exclusion decisions in the name of making sure that your brand only appears in the most hyper-curated, hyper-sanitized environments possible, where you maybe in the past have been very comfortable making broad, you know, blunt exclusion decisions around news or around, you know, you mentioned certain viewpoints, certain topics, certain things that might just, you know, be considered socially sensitive. Therefore, I don't want to touch it, and we want nothing to do with this big chunk of content on the internet. And we, I think, are now seeing scrutiny over the last, I'd say, maybe year or so, of the things that have been caught in that large pool of content that has been, you know, often excluded by marketers. And there may still be brands for which that big chunk of content is not suitable for them, but they need to own that decision, and they can't defer to the notion that, you know, sensitive topics is one of 12 listed categories of potentially controversial content that brands may not want to associate with. You've got to own that choice for yourself.
And just a data point here. So Victor recently did a blog where he cited eMarketer did an analysis that said that advertisers miss 52% of the opportunities on the Oscars by avoiding things around Amelia Perez and
Yeah.
the lucky ones. I can't remember what the title of that movie was, but again, sort of the broad sweeping, you know, avoidance behavior nets you less than half of what's available, right? Because you either don't have the intelligence or you don't have the courage.
Exactly. And, you know, like that highlights, this is not just a question of, you know, brand values. Of course, that is an important component of it, but there's also, you know, potential meaningful business performance that is lost if you are overly excluding content that you don't need to be excluding for one reason or another. So I feel like there's this sort of broader opportunity to kind of reorient the dialogue on all of this to kind of exactly what we have been focused on always, which is being more precise in the decisions that we make in the brand suitability space. And that does need to come from individual brands developing and articulating specific stances that they have on what they do and don't want to be associated with. And, you know, as I've said before, you need to be prepared to defend those stances both internally and externally in case they, you know, face scrutiny. But being able to frame that in terms of not just values, but to back it up with, you know, the business implications of those decisions that you're making is important in being able to tell that story. Now, brand suitability aside, I think there's just a general move towards, you know, individual marketer accountability there and greater specificity, which can be, you know, sort of force multiplied by things like AI solutions, like we talked about. I think there's also an opportunity to recenter our focus on it's kind of the things that would fall into the brand safety floor, as, you know, we generally think of it as an industry, because I think in recent years we have seen fewer sort of fires in that particular space than we have in the past, because we have solutions in the market right now that we haven't in the past, whether that's individual brand suitability tools for marketers, brand safety protections on platforms are getting better, third-party verification and measurement. All these things are coming to market that we talked about for a long time.
Right. And there's also really an industry agreement that anything below this level, just we kind of agree it's not good. Right.
Exactly. So the, you know, recent press that has come out and reports around, you know, ad serving on websites that have been accused of hosting illegal content, that has received bipartisan scrutiny in Congress. And clearly there are still areas that both sides of the aisle agree should never be monetized and of course shouldn't be on the internet, but advertising support around that is the worst thing that can happen in our industry. And let's kind of invest in continuing to strengthen that floor, because even if those fires are fewer and further between, that doesn't lessen the impact that they have when they come up. So I very much think that there's an opportunity, increase customization and individual responsibility on the suitability side, but also kind of reinvest in those areas where that we all collectively agree should not be monetized, when there's an opportunity to continue doing that as well.
Yeah. All right. So you've touched on some of this, and I don't want to sort of drone on too much, but when you think about this suitability issue and trying to align with brand values, right? And you've got sort of this environment out there where there's the retrenchment of DEI, there's the more bipartisan approach to what is valid news. There's potentially some ramifications coming down the line relative to privacy, and having now 20 states that have their own privacy rules, right? It can be paralyzing, right? To sort of understand how you sort of surf around all of that squishiness in the marketplace, because these issues are so central. They come up all the time, and then poof, you've got, like the Oscar thing, a whole bunch of inventory that you can never use because it's topically right in the media marketplace. And how does anyone sort of manage around that? And I don't, you've touched on it in part, so I just wanted to bring that perspective together for the listener.
Yeah, so I will preface, I'm by no means a privacy or legislation expert by trade. I don't really have advice for how folks can effectively navigate that. That's just an increasingly complex space. And as we are increasingly unable, at least in the US, to develop any sort of nationwide privacy legislation, states are going to continue to go at it alone. And when there is an inability to come together as a group and agree upon something that's sweeping, those individual regulations are going to naturally differ, the same way that they differ from those US states with those regulations coming out of the UK and the EU. And the more kind of smaller pieces of legislation that come out that are geo-specific, the more difficult that is for folks to navigate. You would think that people would recognize that it is in our collective best interest to develop something that is broad, because that makes it easier for everyone to comply with. So you don't have to have an armada of lawyers that you hire specifically for making sure that you are compliant with all the different laws that you need to be in the markets where you operate. But that does not seem to be something that we have been able to wrap our heads around. As it relates to kind of just excluding the legal side of things, we have talked a long time in a lot of different forums about how just the umbrella of brand safety continues to expand, and the responsibilities of anyone who is responsible for doing this work, regardless of where in the industry you sit, gets progressively more and more complicated. I personally miss the days when all I had to worry about was 2 individual content moderation teams geared to 2 very specific, nice, packaged up areas of the platform. And as long as ads didn't show up next to bad shit there, I was good. But then having to, pivot to being the sort of advertiser face of anything that Twitter did that advertisers took issue with was, certainly a career evolution, if nothing else. But I do think it's getting increasingly more complicated. And as we see, like I said, with the sort of introduction of more tools and means by which content can be effectively avoided if you want to, we're seeing fewer and fewer fires in this space. And that makes the job of quantifying the value that brand safety work adds more difficult, because generally with risk mitigation work, it's really hard to quantify the value of the risk you're mitigating unless you do something wrong. And then you find out just how much you stand to lose if you don't invest in these things. So with those instances being fewer and further between, that leads to leadership questioning why we are investing so much in this suite of third-party verification solutions, and why are we investing in building out this technology internally at a platform and whatnot. And it requires a certain level of just understanding that this is the right thing to do, and understanding that there is a tangible downside of of risk that we're mitigating as a result. um, but I don't have a silver bullet for folks on how to address that. But I think just sort of reinforcing the drumbeat and building strong internal relationships with the folks that you need to make sure that they understand the importance of the work that you do is helpful for anyone who does brand safety work, and making sure that you have advocates outside of your immediate space that can defend the importance of your work if there are conversations happening about that in rooms that you might not be in. So, not obligatory plug for BSI's Brand Safe Workforce Program. We have a training that is specifically geared towards people who are external to individual kind of core brand safety teams at companies, people like comms teams or legal teams that would benefit from understanding what it is that your team does, why your work is important, but that don't need the in-depth day-to-day sort of understanding of it that our full certification course would offer. So would encourage folks to take advantage of that.
Right on. So build your coalition, and sort of know what your corporate strategy is with regard to brand safety. That will help keep you safe, and at least provide a context for why you're spending the money to achieve whatever result that you're achieving at any point in time. Good reminder. So, all right, moving on. So in the back half of 2024, I think, yeah, this idea of MFAs, or made for advertising sites, came into full view. And another example of, just when you think everything is going right, here's another thing to be concerned about with brand safety. So, so one of the things that you and others at BSI have done is create an MFA utility in cooperation, and again, cooperation with a number of players, to bring to the marketplace a way to sort of understand and evaluate MFA potential content and sites. So if you would, can you take a little bit to talk about BSI's role in helping to sort of create this utility, how it works, what you use it for, and just help people sort of understand what MFAs are and how to avoid them?
Yeah, absolutely. So MFA as a concept, kind of like what we were talking about AI, like not necessarily a new concept, but a concept that has recently sort of gotten a catchy term associated with it and has generated cause for concern in the industry. I feel like this sort of started gaining traction towards the end of 2023 with folks sort of taking sort of stabs in the dark at defining exactly what a made for advertising site is. And I feel like what the industry sort of landed on is a set of potential signals that may indicate a site meets this criteria. It's a little arbitrary. It includes things such as like the ad load on the page, the extent to which those things are automatically refreshed, and other sort of tactics that might be used to artificially inflate viewership of ads on a platform. And again, just as a consumer of the internet, the notion of being bombarded with ads online is hardly a concept that waited to make its way onto the scene until late 2023. But one of the things that our publisher council was identifying as this topic really sort of reached broad adoption, I suppose, was the fact that this was a very vague concept. It was very much dependent on the eye of the beholder, and publishers were getting winding up on exclusion lists and being cut out of inventory out of this, because they were being characterized as MFA, but they weren't sure, which lists they were showing up on. And even if they knew what list they were showing up on, they didn't necessarily know why they were there. Because again, this essentially you end up characterized in one of these ways as a result of a large set of characteristics where there may not be an exact threshold at which you suddenly cross over into, maliciously manipulating ad traffic on your site versus not. So acknowledging that there was, and we've experienced this in other industry forums where we have attempted to collectively write frameworks and provide helpful definitions in the past, where there's only a certain level of specificity and granularity that you can reach when you get all of the stakeholders into a room, because everyone feels so differently about all these topics. And what you're left with is kind of a vague set of concepts that still require a great degree of individual company interpretation to actually operationalize. So where we found ourselves was that we have a broad set of third-party verification partners that were developing their own sets of more detailed guidance and criteria for what is and isn't an MFA list, developing their own exclusion lists based on that, and then offering those to marketers. But publishers didn't have sufficient transparency into how that was happening. So what BSI did is work with our publisher council and leading verification partners to develop a free utility that publishers can sign up for and use that allows you to check whether domains that you are associated with. We have a verification process to make sure that you are associated with the domains that you're checking, but to see whether your site is showing up on any of the MFA exclusion lists at time of recording offered by Integral Ad Science, Jounce Media, DeepSeek.io, and Adfontis Media. We, of course, hope to incorporate additional partners into that program in the future. But this is really a diagnostic to say, here are the lists of those participating vendors that your site does or does not show up on. And in order to remediate that, if you think that you're showing up on a list in error, here's where you go to reach out to remedy that. So it's really a one-stop shop sort of diagnostic tool for publishers. As we progress, we hope to integrate other signals beyond just MFA that get at this broader concept of inventory quality to help this be a more holistic one-stop shop for publishers to understand where they're being blocked and why. Now, I think there's this sort of broader concept of BSI as a professionals organization. We have invested a lot in the past on driving thought leadership and offering education and resources for the industry, but this really sort of signals a step change for us in really getting into the development of actual tools that help people be more effective at their jobs. And I'm really excited about this direction for us. I think there's a lot more that we could stand to do in this space to give people tangible tools that they can put their hands on that make their jobs easier in a host of different ways. But I think the sort of first step in the way of making publishers' lives easier on this very broad, ambiguous topic that has become a real problem and sticking point for them in the last year and a half or so is an important venture into that space. And yeah, I'm excited about it.
Right on, right on. Well, congratulations. So, if anything, that's clear evidence that for a brand safety officer, the job is just never done. There's always something new. And so, first of all, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, and giving us some thoughts around sort of what are the big themes that brand safety officers need to be looking at in 2025. In 2025, we also know that the list of things to watch will grow. If we look at the current environment, the landscape is shifting in real time, affecting how people make decisions. And then importantly, to your early point, that brands seem to have to take a more specific role and authority in sort of making those decisions and defending them in the current environment. So there's lots more to come. So thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts today, and keep knocking them dead, AJ.
Fair enough. I have a question for you, actually. In the face of a lot of these things that we have been talking about and the forebodingness of the volume of things that people need to worry about in our line of work, how do you stay sane? Where do you find Zen right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. It's really hard. It's so much coming at you in so many different directions. I think that personally, I think that we haven't really seen the impact of the real shifts that are coming. I think from a Washington administration standpoint, there's been a tremendous kick up of dust. I think that dust is designed to distract us from what's coming. So my thought is brace yourself. The other thing is, out of there's a phrase, I can't think of it right now, but um, out of sort of desperation comes opportunity. So, I think there will also be let's return to some of the goodness in programming and content. And people will want to look for and consume things that are happier, lighter, more life affirming. Um, so I think we're going to see in 2025, and maybe not till maybe toward the end of 2025, the pendulum start to shift back toward uh, protecting real values versus purported values. Um, and the other thing is, you just have to stay on top of it. It is so constant and what you know today changes seemingly in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's no easy task. I think BSI is well positioned to be able to help people sort through some of the morass of information, uh, uh, scary situations. um, and I think one of the strongest parts uh, of BSI is actually having all these different councils so people can actually share intelligence together. And when you have a view of how your contemporaries are behaving in the current environment, it helps give you strength, right, for making the decisions that you need to make and then also defending them internally. So I don't know that I'm sane. I don't know that I've ever been sane. Um, um, but I always try to ingest stuff, massage it around in my head, and kind of contextually understand what that means to today versus last month. Um, and we're in a really tough place. 2025 is going to be challenging. So, I, did that answer your question?
Yeah. Stay informed, lean on your network, maybe find time in the day when you can ignore the news, but maybe do a little better than the mayor of New York just saying you're not looking at the news at all anymore. We'll
Yeah,
get through.
the news is not a happy place anymore. No, it
Yeah.
isn't.
Yeah.
So,
I always try to, find some time in my day where I get a chance to work out, move my body, and like turn off my phone during that period where there is a task that I have to be focused on. Ideally, there's someone yelling at me to do it, and I could not check my phone if I wanted to, and then I get to doom scroll afterwards.
boom, right? Because it's always there.
Yep. And
Indeed.
it'll happen whether or not you are there to make yourself aware of it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you, AJ. And here we go, 2025. It's going to be a challenge. Thank you so much, AJ.
Thanks, Lewis. Always a pleasure, my friend.